Undoubtedly, the Centurion is the most successful British tank ever in terms of marketing and combat records. Although this tank was too late to prove itself in the Second World War, it managed to mark the First Cold War. It was the hero of many wars and particularly the savior of Israel. Now, we're investigating the Centurion, the legendary Knight of the Crown. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel before we start and give us a thumbs up if you like our video. To be notified of our new video, please click the bell button. During the First Cold War, we could see a legendary tank, the Centurion, played a critical role and sealed the fate in many of the major conflicts. Yes, the Centurion was a tank of the First Cold War, but its story began during the Second World War. The development of the Centurion began in 1943. In those years, the British Army had two types of tanks, the infantry tank and the cruiser tank. The infantry tanks were being used to support infantry. They were highly armored but relatively slow. The mission definition of these tanks was to break through the heavily defended areas in the enemy lines in coordination with the infantry units. After that, the faster but relatively low armored cruiser tanks were rapidly advancing to cut the enemy's supply and communication lines and to search and destroy the enemy's artillery batteries. But the German Tiger and the Panther tanks caused the British Army to change its perspective. Since the beginning of the war, the 88mm gun had been one of the most fearsome opponents of the Allied tanks. Now, the Tiger had this gun. Also, its armor was too thick. The Panther was a superior tank in terms of firepower, ballistic protection, and maneuverability. In 1943, the UK already had the 76.2mm 17-pounder gun, which was equivalent to the 75mm KWK-42 gun of the Panther. Yet, no available British tanks were capable of being fitted with this gun due to the limited size of its turret. As an interim solution, the UK developed the Archer and the Achilles, but these tank destroyers were not suitable for offensive missions. The 17-pounder gun was also fitted onto the M4 Sherman tanks. This variant, called Sherman Firefly, was highly effective in terms of firepower, but its protection was not as desired. So, in 1943, the British Army requested the development of a new tank. It would also be able to stand 75 and 88mm guns. Also, this tank would have the 17-pounder gun that could penetrate the armor of the latest German panzers. The design works of the Centurion started immediately. The new tank would be equipped with the 20mm Polston gun against the enemy's anti-tank crew. It would have the Rolls-Royce Merlin petrol engine. This engine was a derivative of the power plant used by the Spitfire and Hurricane fighters as well as the Lancaster bomber. The British Army had observed that after being hit, the ammunition inside the turret could cause a catastrophic explosion. Therefore, the Centurion would carry its ammunition for the main gun below the level of the turret ring. But the Allies were preparing for the invasion of Europe. The resources had to be used for building up a massive army. Therefore, the development of the Centurion proceeded slowly, and the tank didn't see a combat in the Second World War. After a small number of Centurion Mark I had produced, the production shifted to up-armored Mark II variant. The tank became operational in 1946. The tank had the Horstman suspension system. This suspension provided better cross-country capability and maneuverability to the Centurion than the cruiser tanks. Also, its survivability was superior to the infantry tanks. Therefore, the Centurion was able to be used for both roles. So, it was a universal tank, in other words, a main battle tank. There are many Centurion variants and derivatives. We will talk only about the major ones. The Centurion Mark II didn't have the 20mm Polston gun. This gun had intended to be operated by the loader. But when he concentrated on using the gun, the loader couldn't feed the main gun effectively. In 1948, production of the Centurion Mark III began. This variant had an 84mm 20-pounder gun. The gun could fire the armor-piercing, discarding sabot projectile. At that time, this was an important feature because the Western armies needed a tank which could encounter the Soviet IS-3 tank. Thanks to this munition, the 20-pounder gun could penetrate the highly thick armor of this tank. Also, the Mark III had a turret stabilization system, so the tank could engage a target while on the move. The new Centurion variant had two 51mm bomb thrower Mark II mortars. These mortars could fire white phosphorus munition, which was effective against nearby enemy infantries by burning fiercely. Yet, this concept was not effective as expected, and the bomb thrower Mark II was eliminated in later variants. During the 1956 Hungarian uprising, the British intelligence gained the chance to examine the Soviet T-54 and ran an extensive report about it. Based on this report, the UK developed a 105mm rifled gun called the L7. In 1958, the Centurion Mark VII became the first production tank fitted with the L7, one of the most successful Western tank guns. Later, many Centurion users equipped their tank with this gun. Also, many Centurion variants were fitted with a 12.7mm ranging gun. In general use, this gun was firing a 3-round burst of eliminating rounds to determine the enemy's exact location and range. Until the M60 and the Leopard 1 were introduced, the Centurion had been the best tank available in the West. The biggest disadvantage of the Centurion was its low range. Many modifications were made and many variants were developed to overcome this problem. However, the tank's original production models with the petrol engine never had a satisfactory range. Besides the United Kingdom, in a short time, Australia, Canada, Denmark, Egypt, India, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Singapore, Somalia, South Africa, Sweden, and Switzerland chose this tank. The 4-person crew of the latest variant of the Centurion consisted of a commander, driver, gunner, and loader. Its hull length was 7.82 meters. The tank was 9.85 meters long, 3.39 meters wide, and 3.01 meters high. Its combat weight was 51.82 tons. The 650 horsepower Rolls-Royce Mark IV-B petrol engine provided a maximum road speed of 35 kilometers per hour. The range of the tank was 190 kilometers. The Centurion Mark XIII could negotiate 0.91 meter vertical steps, 3.35 meter trenches, and it can fort to a depth of 1.45 meters. It had a 105mm L7 rifled main gun, two 7.62mm and one 12.7mm machine guns. Many countries modernized their Centurion fleets. One of the most known upgraded variants of the tank was the Israeli Sho't. The Israel Defense Forces equipped its Centurions with the 105mm L7 gun, the 750 horsepower AVDS 1790 2AC diesel engine, the Allison CD 8506 automatic transmission, and a new cooling system. The engine compartment was enlarged and raised to fit the tank with a new power pack. Using a diesel engine increased the range and survivability of the Centurions. Besides, the ammunition capacity of the Sho't was increased to 72. After the 1973 Yom Kippur War, some of the Shots were equipped with a new turret drive mechanism, a new gun stabilizer, a new fire control system, and the Blazer explosive reactive armor packages. Similarly, South Africa modernized some of its Centurions. First, 8 of these tanks were fitted with an 810 horsepower petrol engine coupled with a new 3-speed transmission by the Skokian project. Later, South Africa started the SAMUL program. Then, South Africa equipped the tank with a new suspension, new turret drives, and new vision equipment. This new variant was named Olifant. The later Mark 1A variant of the Olifant had a locally built version of the 105mm L7 type rifled gun, 81mm smoke grenade launchers, night vision equipment for the commander, and 750 horsepower diesel engine coupled to a semi-automatic transmission. The Olifant Mark 1B was equipped with new suspensions, a 950 horsepower engine, the Amtra 3 automatic transmission, laser rangefinder, and a reinforced floor against landmines. It has passive composite armor packages over the frontal glacis plate and turret. The Olifant Mark II is equipped with a 1040 horsepower Continental turbocharged diesel engine, an upgraded fire control system, and a computerized battle system. The tank has the hunter-killer capability. The Centurion was baptized with fire in 1950 during the Korean War. A British Centurion knocked out a Cromwell tank, which had been captured by North Koreans before. 1 year later, the tank successfully covered the withdrawal of the 29th Brigade of the British Army. In this battle, against the massive Chinese forces' attack, only 5 Centurions were lost. In the rest of the war, these tanks were generally deployed stationary on the high ground and used for fire support missions. Against mortar shell and medium caliber artillery rounds, they were waiting in the prepared positions called the Elephant House, which was fortified with the railway sleepers and sandbags. In 1952, the British Centurions encountered a Chinese heavy artillery storm and got at least 45 direct hits. But none of their crews was even injured. During the war, the tanks repelled many massive Chinese offensives. Especially in the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, the Indian Centurions with 84mm guns made history. In the Battle of Asal Uttar, they knocked out or captured 97 Pakistan tanks with only 6 losses. So, the Centurion proved its superiority to the US-made M47 and M48s. Also, Indian sources claim that this tank managed to shut down a Pakistani OH-13 helicopter with an 84mm round. The Australian Army used its Centurions in the Vietnam War. These tanks were generally deployed to reinforce fire bases. The Australian Centurion were respectable adversaries for the North Vietnamese soldiers who admitted that this tank was extremely difficult to destroy with the RPG-type weapons. Nevertheless, 42 of the 58 Australian Centurions served in Vietnam suffered battle damage. At first, Israeli soldiers had not liked the Centurion, which was more sophisticated and heavier than the previous M4 Shermans and AMX-13s. During the exercises, the tank suffered many mechanical breakdowns. Shortly after, General Israel Tal introduced a new field manual for maintenance. He also increased the training of gunners. The Israeli gunners could reach the rate of fire of 15 rounds per minute, while the Arab gunners only 4 to 5 rounds. Also, as we mentioned before, the Israel Defense Forces were using the upgraded Sho't model. The result was spectacular. In the 1967 Six-Day War, the well-trained Israelis prevailed on all fronts. The Shots proved its ability to continue fighting even after extensive battle damage. The Israelis, who hadn't liked the Centurion at first, were now in love with it. In the 1973 Yom Kippur War, 177 Shots became the savior of Israel at the Golan Front. They encountered nearly 1,400 enemy tanks. In the first 3 days, every Israeli tank at the Golan Front got hit at least 1.5 times. The Israel Defense Forces used 100 shots at the last stage of the battle at Valley of Tears. Actually, these tanks had been knocked out previously, but they had been repaired, manned by the injured crew, and returned to the battlefield. These war-wounded shots managed to win the battle. At the Golan Front, the shots knocked out over 500 Syrian T-55s and T-62s. Yet, especially at the Sinai Front, the Soviet-made AT-3 Sagar hurt them fiercely. Even so, Israel managed to win the battle against the Egyptians. In 1982, the Shots equipped with the Blazer explosive reactive armor against the shape-charged anti-tank missiles fought in Lebanon. Still, during the war, 21 Shots were knocked out, 8 of which were destroyed. The South African Centurions rarely clashed with the enemy tanks. In 1987, the Olifants managed to destroy 2 Angolan T-55s. Some of them were damaged by landmines. Of course, there are many other combat records of the Centurion. Also, we could talk about many other details, but we had to summarize them not to exceed our time. The Centurion was the dauntless protector of the free world's border at the beginning of the First Cold War. He was the hero of the UN forces in Korea and the nightmare of the Pakistani patents. The Centurion was the savior of Israel. It was one of the most successful weapon systems of the First Cold War. Undoubtedly, the legendary Centurion is the pride of British tank history. Thanks for watching our video. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up if you liked our video. To be notified of our new videos, please click the bell button.